At exactly the same moment, in a powerful African kingdom, thousands of human beings were forced to their knees. Iron chains locked around their necks, ropes burned into their wrists, and the earth shook under the sound of marching feet. They were not criminals, they were not soldiers, they were not enemies. They were merchandise. This kingdom did not mine gold, it did not trade spices, it did not grow rich from ivory. It grew rich from human bodies. And for over 200 years, its entire economy, military, religion, and royal power were built on one thing: the sale of human beings. This is the true story of the African kingdom of Dahomey.
In the early 1600s, in what is now southern Benin, a small tribal settlement stood surrounded by thick forest. Its people farmed, they hunted, they worshipped ancestral spirits. They were not powerful, they were not wealthy. But everything changed when European ships appeared along the West African coast. Portuguese, Dutch, British, French, and they came with a hunger that would reshape Africa forever. They wanted labor, they wanted bodies, they wanted slaves, and they were willing to pay. Guns, gunpowder, alcohol, cloth, money. And one small kingdom realized something terrifying. Human beings were more valuable than gold. That kingdom was Dahomey.
Dahomey transformed itself into a military machine. Villages were raided, neighboring tribes were attacked, entire communities were wiped out in night assaults. Men, women, children, anyone who survived the slaughter was chained. They were marched for days, sometimes weeks, no shoes, no food, no mercy. Those who collapsed were beaten, those who resisted were killed. Every year, tens of thousands of people were funneled through Dahomey like livestock, and the king grew rich. European traders built forts along the coast, waiting for the human cargo. A single strong man could be traded for a musket, a woman for cloth and alcohol, a child for gunpowder. The kingdom was no longer farming, it was harvesting people. To protect this human economy, Dahomey built something unheard of in the ancient world: an all-female army. They were called the Agoji, the Dahomey Amazons. They were trained from childhood. No marriage, no children, no softness. They learned to climb thorn walls barefoot. They learned to fight with machetes, spears, and later guns. They learned to execute prisoners without emotion. Their job was simple: raid, capture, kill, protect the slave routes. They became one of the most feared military forces in Africa. Entire villages would surrender at the sound of their war chants.
Once a year, Dahomey held a royal ceremony. It was called the annual customs. European traders were invited, foreign guests attended, and the king would sit on his throne. Then the executions began. Captured slaves were sacrificed to honor royal ancestors. Some were beheaded, some were clubbed, some were buried alive. Their blood was poured on royal graves. This was not punishment, this was ritualized terror, a message to the people: the king controls life itself. Those who were not killed were sold. They were herded into coastal forts, packed into ships, stripped naked, chained together in darkness. Some died before the ships even left Africa. Others jumped into the ocean. Some were beaten until they could not stand. This journey became known as the Middle Passage. Millions never reached the other side, and Dahomey kept supplying bodies year after year. By the early 1800s, Europe began banning slavery. But Dahomey refused to stop, because stopping meant collapse.
No slaves meant no guns. No guns meant no power. No power meant invasion. So Dahomey doubled down. They kept raiding, they kept selling, until European warships finally arrived. The French invaded. The Amazons fought with everything they had. But rifles crushed machetes, cannons crushed spears, and in 1894 Dahomey fell.
Today, Benin stands where Dahomey once ruled. Tourists walk through old slave forts. Children play near abandoned execution grounds. But the truth still echoes. This was not just European slavery. This was a system where African kingdoms sold African lives, and millions vanished into chains.
No statues show the victims. No monuments show the marches. No walls record the screams. But their blood built empires. Their bones built nations. And their silence still hangs over history. This was the African kingdom built on human chains, and the world still lives on what it created. European maps labeled Dahomey's shoreline as the Slave Coast. Not the Gold Coast, not the Ivory Coast, the Slave Coast. Because this narrow stretch of African shoreline became the largest human export zone on Earth. More enslaved Africans passed through this region than any other place in history. Ouidah, Dahomey's main port, became a city built entirely around selling people. There were slave markets, holding pens, auction yards, whipping posts, and a road, a silent road, called the Route of No Return. Anyone who walked that path never came back. From Ouidah's markets, enslaved people were forced to walk a sandy road to the sea, 4 kilometers, under the sun, barefoot, chained, bleeding. At the end of that road stood an archway. Beyond it was the beach. Beyond the beach were ships. Beyond the ships was disappearance. Families were separated at the date. Children were ripped from parents, husbands from wives. Once you crossed the arch, you were no longer considered human. You were cargo. Dahomey told its people a story. They said, "Our power is sacred. Our wealth is divine. Our wars are holy." But this glory was built on terror. A king's throne was carved with skulls. Royal palaces were decorated with human bones. War drums were stretched with human skin. Their wealth did not come from land. It came from death. Historians estimate that Dahomey alone supplied hundreds of thousands of enslaved Africans. But Dahomey was only one kingdom. Together, African slave-supplying states sent over 12 million human beings into the Atlantic world, and millions more died before they ever reached the ships. Africa lost entire bloodlines, languages vanished, villages disappeared, and no records kept their names. They were erased. The plantations of the Americas were built with African blood. Sugar, cotton, tobacco. The wealth that created European empires and American nations was powered by African bodies, sold by African kingdoms. Banks, universities, cities. Many of today's richest institutions were funded by this trade. The chains of Dahomey stretched across oceans. Some Dahomey kings tried to slow the trade, but the kingdom had become addicted. No slaves meant no guns. No guns meant defeat. No defeat meant extinction. They were trapped in a system they created, so they kept feeding it.
until it devoured them too.
Most people are taught only half the story. They are taught about European ships. They are not taught about African kingdoms that hunted Africans. They are taught about plantations. They are not taught about the African markets. Truth is uncomfortable, but it must be told.
The people who were chained never had statues. They never had graves. They never had names written down. But they had families, dreams, songs, loves, and they were sold. This was not ancient history. This was organized human destruction, and its echoes still live inside nations, families, and bloodlines across the world. They were not forgotten, they were silenced. And today, you just heard their story.